The child's eyes rolled back. White, empty, bleeding. 10-year-old Kael's body convulsed on the cold metal floor of the black ship. His screams echoed through the detention bay as psychic energy crackled around his small frame like invisible lightning. The Inquisitor watched, unmoved. Another one burns out. She whispered to her aide. The smell of ozone and terror filled the air. Mark him for immediate processing. Kael's fingernails scraped against steel as the seizure tore through him. Blood trickled from his nose. His mind was splitting open like cracked glass, and something else was trying to crawl through the fractures. Something hungry. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees in seconds. Frost began forming on the walls. The other children pressed themselves against the far corner, whimpering. "Please." Kael gasped between convulsions. "I can control it. I promise I can." His words cut off as his spine arched impossibly backward. The Inquisitor's hand moved to her bolt pistol, standard protocol. When a psyker lost control, there was only one solution. Quick, clean, final. But Kael's eyes snapped open, still white, still bleeding, but aware. I can see them," he whispered, his voice no longer his own. "The things in the dark between stars, they're coming. They're always coming." The psychic storm around him intensified. Metal began to bend. The air itself seemed to scream. The Inquisitor raised her weapon. Her finger found the trigger. One squeeze would end this. One bullet would save them all from what Kael might become. But she hesitated, because in that moment of perfect horror, she realized something that chilled her more than any demon ever could. Kael wasn't losing control. He was learning to use it. The boy turned his bleeding white eyes toward her and smiled. Not Kael's smile. Something else wearing his face. "You need us," the thing that had been Kael said softly. "You hate us. You fear us. You kill us by the thousands. But you need us." The Inquisitor's hand trembled on her weapon. "Because without us, your precious Imperium dies screaming in the dark." The psychic storm stopped. Sudden, complete, terrifying silence. Kael collapsed, unconscious but breathing. The Inquisitor lowered her gun. But what happened next would haunt her for the rest of her very short life. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. And in that endless night, some children are born cursed. The Imperium of Man spans 1,000,000 worlds. Across this vast empire, 1 in 1,000,000 souls manifests the gift that damns them. They call them psykers, wielders of psychic power drawn from the warp itself. But this is no blessing. Every psyker is a potential gateway for horrors beyond imagination. Demons that feast on sanity. Entities that turn reality inside out with a whisper. The Imperium's response is swift. Brutal, absolute. On the factory world of Mordian Prime, 12-year-old Kael Voss had never heard the word psyker. He knew only the grinding rhythm of assembly lines, the acrid taste of recycled air, the weight of his father's expectations. Then came the headaches. At first, just pressure behind his eyes during the night shifts. Then voices that weren't there, whispers in languages that made his teeth ache. The morning, everything changed. Kael was sorting scrap metal in Section 7. His supervisor, Foreman Grix, was screaming about quotas, about worthless workers, about how easily children could be replaced. Kael's anger flared. The metal began to bend, not just one piece. Every twisted fragment of steel in a 50-meter radius started folding itself into impossible shapes. Girders groaned. Conveyor belts snapped like rubber bands. Grix's shouting stopped. The factory floor went silent, except for the sound of tortured metal. Kael looked at his hands, They were glowing with pale fire that cast no shadows. Within hours, the black ships would arrive. The Emperor's psychic hounds would drag him screaming from everything he'd ever known. But Kael didn't know that yet. He thought the worst thing that could happen was losing his job. He had no idea that his real nightmare was just beginning, that his gift would mark him for a fate worse than death, that the Imperium's mercy was reserved for those who could never threaten its existence. In the 41st millennium, being special meant being hunted, being powerful meant being expendable, and being a psyker meant discovering that some prisons are built inside your own mind. That was just the beginning. Alara was 7 when the nightmares began. Not the ordinary fears that plague children in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium. These were different, vivid, real. She would wake screaming about battles that hadn't happened yet. Ships burning in the void, men dying with names she'd never heard. Her mother found her one morning, sitting perfectly still in her bed, blood trickling from her nose, her eyes rolled back, showing only white. "The red ships are coming," Alara whispered in a voice not her own. "They bring teeth and hunger." 3 days later, the Chaos Raiders arrived. The attack came exactly as she'd described, red hulls cutting through the system's edge, boarding pods shaped like gnashing maws. The defenders were ready because of her vision. But salvation carries its own price in the Imperium. Alara's father watched the Arbites take notes, watched them whisper among themselves. The word Psyker hung in the air like incense smoke. He'd heard the stories. Every Imperial citizen had. Children who saw too much, who knew things they shouldn't know, who drew the attention of things that dwelt beyond the veil. The Imperium's solution was always the same. "She saved us," her mother pleaded, clutching Alara's small hand. "She's just a child." The Arbite's captain's face remained stone. Unsanctioned psykers are a threat to humanity itself. The Emperor's mercy is swift. But Alara wasn't listening to the adults. Her gift was showing her something else. Something that made her 7-year-old mind recoil in terror. She saw herself, older, screaming, strapped to a golden throne while robed figures carved symbols into her flesh. She saw her soul being hollowed out, piece by piece, to fuel the Emperor's endless hunger. She saw the black ships, massive vessels that prowled the galaxy, collecting children like her. Cargo holds packed with the psychically gifted. Most would die during the journey. The survivors faced something worse, the soul binding, a ritual so horrific that death was considered merciful. Those who endured it became astropaths, living lighthouses whose minds burned like candles in the warp's darkness. Alara began to cry, not from fear of the Arbites, not from confusion about her fate. She cried because she could see her future, all of it, every moment of agony that awaited her in service to the Golden Throne. The captain raised his hand to signal his men, but the real horror hadn't even begun. 10-year-old Kira pressed her face against the hab block window, watching the sky turn wrong. The ships descended like iron mountains, black hulls that swallowed starlight. No engines roared. They simply were, hanging in the atmosphere like a judgment made manifest. "Mama, why are they so quiet?" Her mother's hand trembled as she pulled the curtains shut. The fabric couldn't block out the psychic pressure. Every mind on the planet felt it. A crushing weight that made thoughts scatter like frightened birds. In the underhive, Marcus felt the arrival like a knife through his skull. The whispers that had plagued him for months suddenly screamed. His makeshift shelter shook as his untrained power lashed out, cracking concrete walls. No, no, no. He clawed at his temples, drawing blood. The black ships had come for the harvest. Across the planet, children began to scream, not from pain, from recognition. Their developing psychic abilities resonated with the ship's approach like tuning forks struck in unison. Kira's eyes rolled back, showing only white. Her mother caught her as she collapsed, foam specking her lips. "They're looking for us," the child whispered. "I can feel them. Searching." The Adeptus Astra Telepathica had perfected their methods over 10,000 years. Psychic resonance scanners swept the planet in grid patterns. Every mind that glowed with the witch sight was catalogued, marked, condemned. In the governor's palace, alarms shrieked. Red warning lights bathed marble halls in the color of blood. "Estimated Psyker population?" Governor Valdris demanded. 12,000 potential candidates, my lord." The aide's voice cracked. "Ages 5 to 16. 12,000 children. 12,000 futures snuffed out in a single harvest. The black ships settled into low orbit, their holds already prepared." Restraint chambers lined the walls, thousands of them, each one sized for a child. Marcus stumbled through the underhive tunnels, his power carving gouges in the metal walls. Behind him, he could hear them coming. Heavy boots, the hum of psychic dampeners, the mechanical breathing of gas masks. The culling had begun. Kira's mother held her daughter tight, feeling the child's temperature spike. Psychic awakening was violent, uncontrolled. The furniture in their small room began to float. "I don't want to go," Kira sobbed. "Please, Mama, I don't want to go." But the choice had never been theirs. The first transports launched from the black ships, carrying teams of sanctioned psykers and null maidens. Each squad had quotas to fill, and they always filled their quotas. But what happened to the children who tried to run would make the harvest itself seem merciful. Kael had been hiding his gift for 3 years. Every morning, he pressed his palms against his temples, squeezed until the voices went quiet, until the whispers of his neighbors' thoughts faded to manageable static. But gifts like his don't stay hidden forever. The first sign came at dawn. A shadow moving wrong across the hab-block walls. Too angular, too deliberate, the kind of darkness that swallowed light instead of bending around it. Then the smell hit him. Ozone and burnt metal, the acrid stench of psychic dampeners warming up. Kaelin's stomach clenched as recognition flooded through him. He'd heard the stories whispered in back alleys and forgotten corners. The black ships had found him. Outside his window, the massive vessel descended through morning fog like a predator stalking prey. Its hull gleamed obsidian black, etched with golden aquelas and purity seals that seemed to writhe in the dim light. Kaelin's mother was making breakfast, humming softly, unaware that her son's life was about to end. The knock came exactly at 7:30, 3 measured raps, authoritative, final. Kael watched his mother's face change as she opened the door, watched hope drain from her eyes like water through cracked stone. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica stood waiting, 4 figures in midnight robes, their faces hidden behind psychic null masks. "Kael Thorne," the lead figure spoke, voice artificially modulated to strip away all humanity. "You will come with us." His mother stepped forward. "Please, he's just a boy. He hasn't done anything wrong." The Telepathica agent tilted his head. "Madam, your son is a registered psyker. His continued presence endangers this entire sector." Kael felt the psychic dampeners activate. The sensation was like drowning in reverse. Instead of water filling his lungs, something vital was being sucked out of him. His gift, his curse, his very essence being methodically strangled. The Emperor protects. His mother whispered, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. The Emperor protects. The agents replied in unison. But as they bound Kaelin's hands with psychic null shackles, he understood the horrible truth. The Emperor didn't protect psykers. The Emperor consumed them. The walk to the transport felt endless. Neighbors watched from doorways and windows, their faces mixing pity with relief. Better. Kaelin than their own children. Inside the black ship's holding bay, dozens of other young psykers sat in perfect silence. Their eyes held the same hollow recognition. They all knew where this journey ended, but what none of them knew was that the real horror hadn't even begun. The black ship's hull groaned against the warp currents. Inside the containment cells, young psyker Matthias pressed his face against the cold metal bars. The ship had been traveling for 3 months now. 3 months since the Adeptus Arbites had dragged him screaming from his family's hab block. The smell hit him first. Unwashed bodies, fear sweat, the metallic tang of blood from those who'd tried to resist their restraints. "Where are we going?" whispered the girl in the cell beside him. Matthias had stopped asking that question weeks ago. The ship's crew never answered. They barely looked at the psykers as human. The warp engines hummed deeper. Through the reinforced porthole, Matthias glimpsed something that made his blood freeze. Colors that shouldn't exist, twisted in impossible geometries. Shapes that hurt to perceive danced in the void between realities. This was the warp, the realm of demons and madness. "Look away," he whispered to the girl. Never looked directly into the warp. But she was already staring. Her eyes began to glow with an unnatural light. The temperature in the cell block dropped 20 degrees in seconds. Frost formed on the metal walls. Other psykers began to whimper as psychic pressure built like a storm front. Matthias felt it too. The thing calling to them from beyond the veil. Ancient, hungry, patient. The girl's mouth opened in a silent scream. Blood trickled from her nose as her untrained mind touched something vast and malevolent in the warp. "Help her!" Matthias shouted to the guards. They didn't move. They'd seen this before. The girl's body convulsed. Her spine arched impossibly backward. When she spoke, it wasn't her voice anymore. "See, you, all." The words echoed with the weight of eternity. Every psyker in the cell block felt the presence behind those words. Something that had been waiting in the warp for millennia. Matthias pressed himself against the far wall as the girl's eyes rolled back, showing only white. Her skin began to change color, taking on a sickly purple hue. The guards finally moved, but not to help. They raised their weapons. Demonic possession confirmed. One reported into his voxcaster. Initiating purge protocol. Matthias realized with growing horror that this wasn't an emergency. This was expected. This was why they kept the psykers in separate cells. This was why the journey took so long. They weren't just transporting psykers to Terra. They were testing them, seeing who would break, who would become possessed, who would survive the journey through hell. But the real horror hadn't even begun. The Golden Throne's light burns like molten metal against Kira's retinas. She stands among 99 other psykers in the sanctum. Imperialis. The air tastes of ozone and fear. Each breath scrapes her throat raw. The Emperor's psychic presence presses down like a mountain. Her skull feels ready to crack. "Step forward," commands the Adeptus Custodes captain. Kira's bare feet slide across marble slick with previous ceremonies. Dark stains mark where others have fallen. The stone is still warm. She knows what comes next. Every psyker does. The soul binding will either forge her into an astropath or reduce her to ash. The statistics are brutal. Only 60% survive. The rest become screaming pyres of human fat and bone. But survival comes with its own horror. The ritual will burn out her eyes, sear away her sight forever. Replace vision with something far worse. The ability to perceive the warp's endless nightmare. "I can feel your terror," whispers the psyker beside her. Blood trickles from his nose. It's delicious. Kira's hands shake. The psychic dampeners around her neck weigh like lead chains. Without them, her fear would explode outward, potentially killing everyone in the chamber. The Emperor's attention turns toward their group. The psychic pressure doubles, triples. Kira's teeth crack from clenching her jaw. The boy next to her starts convulsing, foam bubbling from his mouth. Then the real pain begins. Fire races through her neural pathways. Her optic nerves feel like molten wire. The Emperor's will carves itself into her soul, branding her with his mark. She screams. Every psyker screams. The sound echoes off marble walls for exactly 17 seconds. Then silence. When the light fades, 37 bodies lie cooling on the floor. Their eyes have melted down their cheeks like candle wax. Kira still stands. But her world has changed forever. Where once she saw color and light, now she perceives only psychic emanations. Souls appear as flickering flames. Emotions burn like neon signs. The warp's creatures prowl just beyond reality's edge. "Congratulations," the custodes captain says. "You are now bound to the Emperor's service. Forever." Kira touches her face. Her eye sockets are empty, weeping blood. She tries to speak, but only manages a whisper. "What have you done to me?" The captain's soul flame pulses with something that might be pity. "We have made you useful," he replies. "Now you will serve until madness or death claims you." Kira realizes with growing horror that this isn't the end of her suffering. This is just the beginning. The Schola Psykana's training halls echo with screams that never end. 12-year-old Kara presses her back against cold ceramite walls. Her breath fogs in the artificial chill. The scent of ozone and burnt flesh hangs heavy in recycled air. She watches through reinforced glass as her classmate convulses on the training table. Electrodes snake across his shaved skull like metal parasites. His eyes roll back, showing only white. "Focus your hatred." The instructor drones through Vox speakers. "Channel your fear into power." The boy's screams cut through the chamber. His psychic energy erupts in violet flames that lick the containment field. The smell of burning hair reaches Kara's nostrils. This is lesson 47 in weaponizing human suffering. Kara's fingernails dig crescents into her palms. She's learned that pain keeps the voices quiet. The whispers from the warp that promise easy power, sweet release from this torment. The instructor's servo skull hovers closer to her face. Its red optical lens focuses with a mechanical whir. "Your turn, subject 447. Kara's legs shake as she walks toward the table. Still warm from the previous occupant, she can feel psychic residue clinging to the restraints like invisible cobwebs. The electrodes are ice against her temples. Metal tastes flood her mouth as the neural crown activates. "Today, we test your breaking point," the instructor announces. Pain is the crucible that forges weapons from children. The first pulse sends lightning through her nervous system. Every muscle locks rigid. Her vision whites out, but in that moment of agony, something else awakens. The warp responds to her suffering. Reality bends around her pain like heated metal. She feels the thoughts of everyone in the facility pressing against her mind. The instructor's excitement, the technician's boredom, the other children's terror, and something darker, hungrier. Ancient voices that speak in colors she has no names for. Excellent, the instructor murmurs. Psychic rating upgraded to gamma level. Kara realizes with crystal clarity that she will never leave this place as herself. They're not training psykers here. They're manufacturing monsters. The neural crown powers up for the second pulse. This one will be stronger, designed to shatter whatever remains of her childhood innocence. But as the electricity builds, Kara makes a choice that will damn them all. The screaming had stopped 3 hours ago. Kael pressed his face against the cold stone wall of his cell, listening to the silence that followed the ritual chambers. The metallic taste of fear coated his tongue. Somewhere beyond these walls, another psyker had just been soul-bound to the Emperor, or they had died trying. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica guards moved like shadows through the corridors. Their footsteps echoed with mechanical precision, each bootfall counting down to someone's fate. Kael had learned to read their rhythm. Fast steps meant urgency. Slow steps meant they were carrying a body. Today, the steps were slow. Psyker designation Theta 77. A voice crackled through the Vox speaker. Prepare for soul binding. Kael's blood turned to ice water. That was his designation. The cell door hissed open, releasing a wave of incense and ozone. 2 custodian guards filled the doorway, their golden armor reflecting the dim lumens like captured starlight. Behind them stood a figure in crimson robes, a member of the Adeptus Mechanicus, his face a maze of cables and augmetic implants. Come. The tech priest's voice buzzed through vocal. Synthesizers. The Emperor awaits. Kael's legs betrayed him as he stood. Every psyker knew the statistics. Only 1 in 1,000 survived soul binding intact. The rest either died screaming or emerged as hollow-eyed automatons, their personalities burned away by the Emperor's psychic fire. The corridors stretched endlessly before them. Ancient Gothic arches loomed overhead, carved with skulls and aquilas that seemed to watch their procession. The air grew thicker with each step, heavy with the weight of 10,000 years of sacrifice. Other psykers lined the walls in alcoves, their eyes tracking Kael's movement. Some whispered prayers to the Emperor. Others simply stared with the 1,000-yard gaze of those who had already accepted their fate. They passed the medical bay, where failed soul bindings were processed. Through reinforced glass, Kael glimpsed tables stained with blood and worse things. Servo skulls buzzed overhead, their eye lenses recording every detail for the Imperium's endless archives. The ritual chamber doors stood 30 feet tall, wreathed in protective wards and purity seals. The temperature dropped 20 degrees as they approached. Kael's breath came out in white puffs, each exhalation a countdown to transformation or death. But as the massive doors began to grind open, revealing the blinding golden light within, Kael realized something that made his blood freeze. The Emperor wasn't alone in there. Kael's first assignment came without ceremony. No grand speeches, no benedictions, just a servo skull delivering coordinates to Astropathic Station Gamma 7. The chamber stretched before him like a cathedral of suffering. Hundreds of psykers sat in perfect circles, their eye sockets weeping blood from the soul-binding ritual. The air tasted of copper and ozone. Each astropath wore the same expression of hollow resignation. Take position 17, the choir master commanded, his own scarred face a map of psychic burns. "You will transmit to the Cadian Gate." Kael's hands trembled as he approached the communion throne. The metal was warm from the previous occupant's body heat. Dark stains marked where others had bled. The psychic amplifiers hummed to life around him. "Focus on the message," the choir master whispered. "Let nothing else through." But the warp doesn't care about human intentions. As Kael opened his mind to the immaterium, the screaming began. Not from his throat, from the space between spaces. Demons pressed against the barriers of reality, their hunger palpable. The message was simple. Imperial Guard reinforcements requested. Orc incursion imminent. 23 words that had to cross half the galaxy. Kael felt his consciousness stretch across the void. Stars became pinpricks of agony. The cold between worlds seeped into his bones. Something vast and malevolent noticed his presence. It smiled. "Hold the line," the choir master shouted as 3 astropaths began convulsing. Blood poured from their ears. The message must get through. Kael's vision blurred. The demon's attention felt like acid on his soul. But he pushed forward, driving the message deeper into the warp's currents. Then he felt it. Another mind, impossibly distant. The receiver on Cadia, reaching out across the darkness. For one perfect moment, their thoughts touched. The message transmitted. Kael collapsed, his nervous system on fire. The taste of sulfur filled his mouth. When he looked up, 2 astropaths in his circle weren't moving. Their chairs smoldered where demons had tried to claw through. "Acceptable losses," the choir master noted, making marks on his data slate. The message reached its destination in 47 minutes. Kael stared at the bodies being dragged away. 2 human lives for 23 words. The mathematics of the Imperium's survival. "Rest period is 15 minutes, the choir master announced. "Then we transmit to Armageddon." But as Kael closed his eyes, he felt something else stirring in the warp's depths. Something that had tasted his psychic signature. Something that was now hunting him. Kael had survived 3 years aboard the Eternal Vigil. 3 years of sanctioned service, of controlled channeling, of believing he had found purpose in the Emperor's light. Then the warp storm hit. The ship's Geller field flickered for exactly 17 seconds. In the material universe, that's barely a heartbeat. In the warp, it might as well have been an eternity. Kael felt it first, a wrongness that crawled up his spine like frozen mercury. The temperature in the astropath chamber plummeted. His breath came out in crystalline puffs as reality began to bend. "Something's coming through," he whispered into the Vox, his voice cracking. The walls started bleeding, not metaphorically. Actual crimson rivulets seeped from the blessed steel, pooling on the floor with the sound of rain on leaves. The smell hit him next. Copper and sulfur and something else. Something that reminded him of his sister's hair burning. Then he heard the laughter. Not human laughter. This sound came from throats that had never known air, from mouths that existed only in the spaces between thoughts. It echoed through the ship's corridors, growing louder, multiplying. Kael pressed his palms against his temples, trying to block out the psychic screaming that only he could hear. The other crew members went about their duties, oblivious to the horror seeping through the cracks in reality. But Kael saw them, the demons. They wore the faces of everyone he'd ever loved. His mother smiled at him from the shadows, her eyes replaced by swirling galaxies of madness. His childhood friend Marcus beckoned from the ventilation grate, his skin peeling away to reveal writhing tentacles beneath. "Join us, little psyker," they whispered in perfect unison. "You've always belonged with us." Kael bit down on his tongue until he tasted blood, using the pain to anchor himself to reality. The training kicked in. Mental barriers, sacred mantras, the Emperor's protection. But the demons weren't trying to possess him. They were trying to recruit him. "Look around you." His sister's voice purred from everywhere and nowhere. "Look at what your service has brought you. Pain, isolation, fear. We offer so much more." The Geller field stabilized. The bleeding walls returned to normal. The laughter faded to whispers, then silence. Kael sat alone in the astropath chamber, shaking. The Vox crackled with routine communications. Life aboard the ship continued as if nothing had happened. But something had changed in those 17 seconds. For the first time in his life, Kael had heard the demon's offer, and part of him, a small, desperate part, had listened. The transport ship, Eternal Vigilance, shuddered as it dropped from the warp. Inside the reinforced holding bay, Kira pressed her face against the cold metal wall. The psychic dampening collar around her neck hummed with malevolent energy, sending waves of nausea through her skull. She wasn't alone. 23 other sanctioned psykers sat chained to the walls. Their eyes were hollow, empty. Some rocked back and forth, whispering prayers to the Emperor. Others stared at nothing, their minds already broken by the conditioning. The smell of fear sweat and recycled air filled the cramped space. "First deployment?" whispered the woman beside her. Kira nodded. The woman's left arm was missing below the elbow. Burned scars covered half her face. "Mine too." The woman lied. "You'll be fine." The ship's Vox crackled to life. "Sanctioned assets. Prepare for planetary insertion. Combat zone. Hive City Mortius. Estimated demon incursion. Class Tertius." Kira's blood turned to ice. Class Tertius meant greater demons. The kind that could tear through a space marine's mind like wet paper. The scarred woman leaned closer. "Listen carefully. When they release the collars, you'll feel everything. Every scream, every death, every soul being torn apart on this world." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "The Commissar will tell you to channel it, to use the pain as fuel for your powers. But here's what they don't tell you." The transport bay doors began to open with a mechanical groan. Red emergency lights bathed everything in the color of blood. The demons aren't just feeding on the civilians down there. They're feeding on us. Every time we use our powers, we give them strength. Every psychic blast, every telepathic probe, we're making them stronger. Commissar Thorne stepped into the bay, his bolt pistol gleaming. Behind him, servo skulls floated like mechanical vultures. "Sanctioned psykers, prepare for collar release. Remember your training. Serve the Emperor. Die with honor." The woman grabbed Kira's arm with surprising strength. "The real horror isn't the demons, girl. It's what we become when we realize the truth. We're not weapons against the darkness." The collars began to disengage with a series of metallic clicks. "We're bait." Kira felt her psychic abilities flood back like a dam bursting. But with them came something else, something that made her scream. The woman smiled, and for just a moment, her eyes flashed with an otherworldly light. "Welcome to your first day as a sanctioned psyker. Try not to damn us all." The marble steps leading to the Emperor's throne room gleam with the blood of 1,000 sacrifices. Each footstep echoes like a funeral bell. Today, Mira walks these steps not as a prisoner, but as something far worse. A volunteer, the soul-binding ritual awaits. the most sacred ceremony in the Imperium, the most horrifying fate a psyker can face. You will serve the Emperor directly. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica had promised. You will become one of his chosen. What they didn't mention was the screaming. The throne room stretches beyond sight, its golden walls pulsing with psychic energy. The air tastes of copper and ozone. Ancient incense burns, but cannot mask the smell of charred flesh from previous ceremonies. Mira kneels before the golden throne. The Emperor's presence crashes into her mind like a tidal wave of molten gold. Every thought, every memory, every secret fear laid bare in an instant. This is not communion. This is violation. I offer my soul to serve, she whispers, the ritual words feeling like glass in her throat. The binding begins. Psychic fire erupts through her nervous system. Her eyes boil in their sockets, tears of blood streaming down her cheeks. The Emperor's will burns through her mind, carving new pathways of absolute loyalty. She tries to scream. No sound emerges. The ritual strips away everything that made her human. Her childhood memories of summer rain, her mother's lullabies, the taste of fresh bread, all consumed in the Emperor's golden flame. But here lies the cruel irony that even the Imperium's greatest scholars dare not speak aloud. The Emperor, mankind's supposed savior, is already dead. His corpse sits rotting on the golden throne, sustained only by the daily sacrifice of 1,000 psykers. Each soul-binding ritual feeds this cosmic lie. Mira's agony powers a dead god's delusion. You are reborn. The attending priests chant as her flesh smolders. You are blessed. When the fire finally dies, what remains can barely be called human. Mira's skin has turned translucent, veins glowing with psychic energy. Her eyes are gone, replaced by hollow sockets that weep golden light. She can no longer speak, only transmit the Emperor's will across the galaxy. She has become an astropath, a living beacon of Imperial communication, a slave to a corpse that demands worship. The priests smile as they lead her away, praising the Emperor's mercy. But in the deepest corners of her shattered mind, one terrible question burns. If the Emperor truly loved humanity, why does serving him require becoming something else entirely? The transport ship's hull groaned against the void as Kael pressed his forehead to the cold metal wall. 3 months of training. 3 months of learning to chain his mind with. Psychic wards and blessed litanies. Now came the test. Sanctioned Psyker designation Theta 7. The commissar's voice cut through the engine noise. Your first assignment awaits. Kael's hands trembled as he read the data slate. A forge world. Mechanicus priests reporting. Anomalies. Workers found dead, their bodies twisted into impossible geometries. The smell of incense couldn't mask the fierce sweat coating his skin. A demon engine has manifested in Manufactorum 7. The commissar continued, his bolt pistol never leaving his holster. Your task is simple. Locate it, contain it, destroy it. Simple. The word tasted like ash in Kael's mouth. He'd heard the stories in training. Psykers who faced demon engines and returned as gibbering wrecks. Others who simply disappeared, their souls devoured by entities that shouldn't exist. The transport shuddered as it entered the planet's atmosphere. Through the viewport, Kael saw the forge world's surface. Endless factories belching toxic smoke into a sky the color of dried blood. Thousands of workers, each a tiny spark of life in the mechanical hell below. And somewhere in that maze of steel and steam, something hungry waited. Remember your conditioning, the commissar said, his voice softer now, almost paternal. Trust in the Emperor's protection. Trust in your training. Kael nodded, though his throat felt lined with sand. The demon engine wouldn't be like either practice servitors. This would be alive, malevolent. It would whisper promises of power, try to corrupt his soul with visions of glory. He touched the psychic dampener collar around his neck. The metal was warm against his fingertips, its blessed circuits already humming with protective energy. But would it be enough? The transport touched down with a bone-jarring thud. Steam hissed from the landing gear as the ramp began to lower. Beyond the opening, Kael could see the manufactorum. Massive, dark, silent, too silent. He stood on unsteady legs, his force rod crackling with barely contained energy. The weight of his flak armor felt suddenly insufficient, like wearing paper against a hurricane. "Move out, Psyker," the commissar ordered. Kael stepped toward the ramp, each footstep echoing in the transport's belly. The air outside tasted of machine oil and something else. Something sweet and rotting that made his stomach clench. He was 3 steps from the ramp when the screaming started. Not human screaming. Something else. Something that made his psychic senses recoil in horror. The demon engine knew he was coming. Sister Aurelia had been watching Kael for 3 months now. Every morning, she recorded the same observations in her leather-bound ledger. Day 87. Subject exhibits moderate psychic emanations during prayer. Day 88. Minor telekinetic episode during meditation. Day 89. Subject's eyes bled during communion. The Schola Psychana on Terra processed 10,000 candidates each year. Only 300 survived the initial screening. Of those, perhaps 50 would live to see their sanctioning. Kael didn't know these numbers yet. The boy sat cross-legged in his cell, focusing on the candle flame as instructed. The wax pooled in perfect circles, then began to rise. Droplets of molten fire hung suspended in the air like tears. "Beautiful," whispered Aurelia through the observation slit. But beauty meant danger here. Every display of power brought Kael closer to a terrible choice. The Imperium had learned this lesson 10,000 years ago, written in the ashes of old night. Uncontrolled psykers didn't just die. They opened doorways. They became beacons in the warp, calling to things that hungered for reality itself. Kael's candle flame suddenly flared, white-hot. The temperature in his cell spiked 40 degrees in seconds. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he struggled to maintain control. Then came the whispers. "Let us in." They hissed from somewhere beyond the veil. "Let us taste your world." The boy's eyes snapped open, pupils dilated with terror. The floating wax drops crashed to the floor, sizzling against the cold stone. Aurelia made another note. "Warp contact established. Subject shows resistance, but duration increasing." She closed the ledger and walked down the corridor, her footsteps echoing off walls lined with identical cells. Each one contained a child like Kael. Each one represented the same impossible equation. Power without control meant damnation. Control without power meant uselessness. And the process of finding that balance? It broke most of them. The lucky ones died quickly. The unlucky ones lived long enough to understand what they were becoming. Weapons in human skin, their souls slowly carved away by the very training meant to save them. Aurelia paused at the end of the hall, where a massive steel door bore the Imperial Aquila. Beyond it lay the sanctioning chamber, where tomorrow's lesson would begin. She thought of Kael's terrified eyes, of the whispers that had found him so easily. The boy was powerful, perhaps too powerful. But what they did to the ones who were too powerful to save? That was a lesson Kael would learn soon enough. The astropath's screams echoed through the ship's corridors as the Geller field flickered. Sister Magdalena pressed her palms against her temples, feeling the familiar ice-cold touch of the warp bleeding through reality's cracks. The metal walls around her groaned under psychic pressure that shouldn't exist. But it did exist. And it was getting stronger. "Emperor, protect us," she whispered, tasting copper blood on her lips as her nose began to bleed. The warp storm had been building for 3 days now. What started as minor headaches among the ship's psykers had escalated into something far more sinister. The navigator's third eye wept tears of silver. The choir of astropaths had fallen silent one by one. Magdalena stumbled down the corridor, her bare feet slipping on condensation that felt too warm, too thick. The ship's lights flickered in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Through the observation deck's reinforced glass, she could see it. The warp storm writhed like a living thing. Purple lightning cracked across impossible geometries. Space itself seemed to fold and unfold, revealing glimpses of realms where physics held no meaning, where demons danced. "Sister Magdalena." The voice came from behind her, smooth as silk and cold as the void. She turned slowly, knowing she shouldn't, knowing that whatever spoke wasn't human anymore. Brother Castellan stood in the doorway, but his shadow moved independently. His eyes reflected light that came from no source aboard the ship. When he smiled, she counted too many teeth. "The storm is beautiful, isn't it?" he said, his voice harmonizing with itself in ways that made her stomach clench. "Can you hear them calling?" Magdalena could hear them. The whispers had started hours ago, promising power beyond imagination, promising an end to the constant pain of suppressing her abilities, promising freedom. "They're lying," she managed, backing against the cold glass. "Are they?" Castellan tilted his head, and something wet dripped from his ear. "Look around you, sister. Look at what your precious Emperor's protection has given you." The ship shuddered. Emergency klaxons began wailing. Magdalena felt her psychic barriers crumbling like sandcastles against a tide. The warp pressed against her mind, showing her visions of worlds where psykers ruled as gods instead of cowering as slaves, where they were worshipped instead of feared. "Join us," Castellan whispered, extending a hand that flickered between flesh and something else entirely. Magdalena reached toward him, her fingers trembling. Then the Geller field died completely. But what poured through the breach wasn't what any of them expected. The screaming started at dawn. Kael pressed his face against the cold stone wall of his cell, watching through the barred window as massive black vessels descended through Tertius Prime's orange sky. Each ship stretched longer than a cathedral, their hulls drinking in light like hungry mouths. The Imperium had come for them. "They're beautiful," whispered Mira from the cell beside him. Her voice carried that dreamy quality that meant her psychic sight was bleeding through again. Like funeral shrouds dancing in starlight. Kael's stomach twisted. After 3 months in the detention facility, he'd learned to fear Mira's poetic moments. They always preceded something terrible. The facility's klaxons began their bone-deep wail. Through the corridors, he heard boots. Hundreds of them, marching in perfect synchronization. The sound echoed off stone walls like a mechanical heartbeat. Then came the smell. Incense, sacred oils, the metallic tang of sanctified weaponry. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica had arrived. "Processing begins in 30 minutes, announced a voice through the Vox speakers. each word dripped with mechanical authority. Prepare for neural assessment and soul-binding evaluation. Kael's hands began to shake. He'd heard whispers about soul-binding from the older psykers, how they burned out your eyes with holy fire, how they carved imperial prayers directly into your brain tissue, how most candidates didn't survive the first hour. The lucky ones died quickly. I can see them, Mira continued, her voice growing distant. The Scholastica Psychena agents. Their minds are like empty rooms filled with screaming. Footsteps approach their corridor. Slow, deliberate, each step measured with the precision of a funeral march. Kael closed his eyes and tried to remember his mother's face. The way she'd sung him to sleep before his powers manifested. Before the nightmares started bleeding into reality. Before the Arbites came knocking, the footsteps stopped. Keys rattled against metal. Ancient locks groaned open. Kael Thorn. Psychic rating, Gamma Plus. Neural compliance, pending. The voice belonged to something that had once been human. Now it carried the hollow resonance of someone whose soul had been carved away and replaced with pure, imperial doctrine. Kael opened his eyes. A figure in midnight black robes stood in his doorway. Where its face should have been, only shadows writhed beneath a skull-faced mask. In its hands, silver chains gleamed with psychic suppression runes. Time for your evaluation, young psyker. But as the chains touched his wrists, Kael felt something else, entirely. Something was watching them from the black ships above. Something ancient, something hungry, and it wasn't imperial. The golden throne room stretched endlessly before Kira, its walls pulsing with psychic energy that made her bones ache. 10,000 candles flickered in perfect unison, their wax tears pooling on marble floors older than civilizations. She wasn't alone. 50 other psykers knelt in perfect rows, their heads shaved, their bodies trembling. Some wept silently. Others stared ahead with the hollow gaze of the already broken. The youngest couldn't be more than 12. The air tasted of ozone and fear. Today you die, the Inquisitor announced, his voice echoing off vaulted ceilings. Tomorrow you serve. Kira's wrists burned where the psychic dampeners bit into flesh. Around her, the other psykers began to hyperventilate. The smell of urine and terror filled the sacred space. But this wasn't execution. This was something far worse. The massive doors groaned open, revealing a procession of robed figures carrying crystalline containers. Inside each container, something writhed. Something that had once been human soul fragments. Pieces of the Emperor himself. The soul binding, whispered the girl beside Kira, her voice cracking. They're going to burn our souls together with his. The first psyker was dragged forward, a boy who couldn't stop screaming. The Inquisitors forced his eyes open as they approached with the crystal. The fragment inside pulsed with golden light that hurt to look at. When it touched his forehead, the boy's scream cut off. His eyes exploded in fountains of blood and light. Steam rose from the empty sockets as his body convulsed, held upright only by the Inquisitor's grip. But he was still alive, still conscious, still serving. The pain never stops. One of the robed figures explained conversationally. But you'll never break faith again. The Emperor's will becomes your will. His thoughts, your thoughts. The newly bound psyker stood, blood streaming down his cheeks like crimson tears. When he turned toward the remaining candidates, Kira saw the truth that shattered her last hope. He was smiling, not with his mouth, that hung slack with trauma, but with something deeper, something that was no longer entirely human. Next, the Inquisitor called. Kira watched as they dragged the weeping girl forward, watched as they prepared the crystal fragment, watched as they positioned it above her forehead. But then the girl looked back at Kira and winked. Something was terribly wrong here. This wasn't random selection, but the real horror hadn't even begun. Kael's first mission briefing felt like a death sentence wrapped in parchment. The Inquisitor's chamber reeked of incense and old blood. Candles flickered against stone walls carved with protective wards that seemed to writhe in the dancing light. Demon incursion on Tertius Prime, the Inquisitor said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Mining colony. 3,000 souls. Kael's hands trembled as he received the data slate. The metal felt ice cold against his palms, despite the chamber's oppressive heat. 3 months of training. 3 months of learning to cage the monster in his mind. Now they wanted him to unleash it. Your psychic sight will reveal what our auspex cannot, the Inquisitor continued. The demon's true form, its weaknesses. The shuttle ride to Tertius Prime lasted 18 hours. Kael spent every minute staring at his reflection in the viewport, watching his eyes flicker with uncontrolled power. The other members of his kill team avoided him. He could taste their fear like copper on his tongue. Tertius Prime's surface was a wasteland of twisted metal and screaming winds. The mining facility rose from the ground like a metallic tumor, its lights flickering in patterns that hurt to look at. Warp corruption, whispered Sister Agatha, the team's confessor. The very air bleeds. Kael opened his third eye. The world exploded into nightmare. Reality peeled away like rotting flesh. The facility wasn't just corrupted, it was alive. Tentacles of pure malice writhed through the corridors. Faces pressed against the walls from the inside, mouths open in eternal screams. And in the center of it all, something vast and hungry waited. Kael doubled over, vomiting blood onto the rockcrete. The demon's presence felt like molten lead poured directly into his brain. "What do you see?" the Inquisitor demanded. Kael wiped crimson from his lips, tasting sulfur and despair. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to close his psychic sight and pretend the horror didn't exist. But 3,000 souls depended on him. "It's not just one demon," he whispered, his voice cracking. "It's a greater demon, and it's been feeding for weeks." The Inquisitor's face went pale beneath his skull-faced mask. Feeding on what? Kael looked at the facility again, seeing past the metal and stone to the writhing mass of agony beneath. His psychic sight showed him the truth in all its terrible clarity. The miners weren't dead. They were still alive, their souls being slowly devoured, their screams echoing through dimensions human minds weren't meant to perceive, on everything. Kael whispered. Then the facility's lights went out, and something roared in the darkness. 30 years. That's how long Astropath Meridia had served the Imperium. 30 years of burning her mind to carry messages across the void. Now she sits in the astropathic choir chamber, her eye sockets empty and weeping. The ritual blinding that made her useful to the Emperor's will. The smell of incense cannot mask the stench of her rotting flesh. Her fingers, once steady enough to transcribe stellar coordinates, now shake uncontrollably. The psychic strain has eaten her nervous system from within. Each message she sends tears another piece of her soul away. "Another transmission, Astropath," the Vox Master commands. Meridia's throat constricts. She knows what this will cost. Her. The last message left her coughing blood for 3 days. Her teeth have begun falling out. Her hair came away in clumps this morning, but she cannot refuse. The warp energy builds inside her skull like molten metal. She feels her consciousness stretch across impossible distances, riding currents of pure madness. Demon whispers claw at her mind, promising sweet release from this endless torment. The message burns through her. Fleet coordinates to the Cadian Gate. When she collapses, blood streams from her nose. Her left arm hangs useless, nerves finely severed by psychic feedback. She can taste copper and something else, something that shouldn't exist in real space. The Medicae servitor approaches with its clicking augmetic limbs. It injects her with stimulants and neural stabilizers, enough to keep her functional for perhaps another dozen transmissions, maybe less. How many more can she handle? The Voxmaster asks. The servitor's mechanical voice grinds out its assessment. Estimated operational lifespan, 72 hours. Meridia laughs, a wet, broken sound. 72 hours. After 3 decades of faithful service, she has earned 72 more hours of agony. She thinks of the young psykers in the holding cells below. Fresh minds, untested by the warp's corruption. They watch her with terrified eyes when the guards march them past her chamber. They see their future in her ruined flesh. The irony cuts deeper than any demon's claw. The more powerful a psyker becomes, the faster they burn out. The Emperor's greatest servants are also his most disposable tools. Another message waits in the queue. Meridia closes her empty sockets and prepares to die a little more. But in the shadows of the astropathic choir, something else stirs. Something that has been watching, waiting, something that feeds on despair. Marcus felt the demon's claws rake across his mind one final time. Blood streamed from his nose, his vision blurred as the warp entity writhed in its psychic death throes. But Korthak the Whisperer had one last card to play. You think you've won, little psyker? The demon's voice echoed through the astropathic chamber. Look around you. Marcus's enhanced senses swept the room. The other psykers lay motionless at their stations. Their breathing was shallow, mechanical, too shallow. I've been feeding on them for months. Korthak hissed. Every transmission, every psychic message sent across the void. I took a piece of their souls. The temperature in the chamber plummeted. Ice crystals formed on the brass communication arrays. Marcus realized the horrifying truth. The demon hadn't been trying to possess him. It had been using him as bait. 17 astropaths, the demon whispered. 17 souls to fuel my ascension. And you? You helped me collect them all. The other psykers began to convulse. Their eyes rolled back, showing only white. Black veins spread across their pale skin like infected spider webs. Marcus tried to reach them, psychically. His mind touched empty shells. Their souls were gone. The Imperium will blame you. Korthak laughed. The psyker who couldn't protect his own kind. The one who led a demon straight to them. Marcus felt his sanity fracturing. Every person he'd tried to save. Every soul he'd sworn to protect. All of them lost because of his pride. But I offer you a choice. The demon purred. Join me willingly. Let me complete the ritual, and I'll return their souls to their bodies. The astropath's convulsions intensified. Blood frothed from their mouths. Decide quickly, Marcus. They're dying. Marcus looked at Sister Agatha's motionless form, at young Tobias, barely 16, who'd reminded him of his younger brother, at all the innocent souls who trusted him to keep them safe. The demon's offer hung in the air like poison. Save them by damning himself. become the very thing he'd fought against, or watch them all die knowing he could have prevented it. 10 seconds, Psyker. Marcus raised his trembling hand toward the demon's manifestation. But what he did next would haunt the Imperium for generations. The Sanctum's air tasted of copper and ozone. Brother Captain Thaddeus watched as the young Psyker's eyes rolled back, showing only white. Blood vessels burst across her pale skin like crimson spider webs. "Begin the ritual," he commanded, his voice echoing off obsidian walls carved with protective wards. Sister Lyra had volunteered, 23 years old, sanctioned for barely a decade. Her psychic gift could commune with the Emperor's light itself. But communion required sacrifice. The girl's body convulsed as her soul touched the warp. Every nerve ending screamed as demonic entities clawed at her consciousness, hungry for entry into real space. I see him," she whispered, tears of blood streaming down her cheeks. The golden light erupting from her eyes illuminated the chamber. Ancient machinery hummed to life, feeding on her psychic emanations. The astropathic choir began their chant, weaving her sacrifice into a message that would cross the galaxy. Thaddeus felt the temperature drop 20 degrees in seconds. Lyra's screams pierced the sacred silence. Her flesh began to smoke as soul fire consumed her from within. The smell of burning hair and charred meat filled the air. "Hold the connection," Thaddeus ordered, though his hands trembled. This was the 4th Psyker this month. The Imperium's hunger for communication across the void was insatiable. Every world needed guidance. Every fleet required coordinates. Every battle demanded the Emperor's blessing, and every message cost a human soul. Lyra's back arched impossibly. Vertebrae cracked like gunshots. Her mouth opened in a silent scream as her vocal cords burned away, but the message was transmitting. Across 10,000 light years, another sanctioned Psyker would receive their desperate plea for reinforcements. The siege of Cadia could not fall. Humanity's survival hung in the balance. Worth one girl's agony? Worth her sanity? Worth her life? Thaddeus had stopped asking those questions years ago. The golden light flickered. Lyra's body began to collapse inward, soul fire consuming muscle and bone. Her sacrifice was nearly complete. The astropathic machinery recorded every psychic frequency, every scream, every prayer. In the Imperium of man, even death served the Emperor. Lyra's final breath escaped as steam. Her body crumbled to ash, leaving only the echo of her sacrifice burning in the warp. Thaddeus made the sign of the Aquila over her remains. Then he turned to the next volunteer, but the chamber's temperature kept dropping. The golden light dims in the throne room. The Psyker kneels before the master of mankind, her mind fractured beyond repair. 10,000 years of feeding souls to the Astronomicon has left her hollow, empty. The Emperor's psychic presence washes over her like warm honey mixed with razors. She remembers being 8 years old, black ships descending, her mother's tears freezing on pale cheeks as they dragged her away. The smell of ozone and fear. Now she understands the truth. Every Psyker's journey ends here, in this golden cage, before this corpse god who devours their essence to keep humanity's light burning in the darkness. The Emperor speaks without words. His voice echoes in dimensions that have no names. You have served well. Her bones creak as psychic energy drains from her marrow. The taste of copper floods her mouth. Blood runs from her eyes like crimson tears. She thinks of her sister Psykers, thousands fed to the throne daily, their screams harmonizing in frequencies only the dead can hear. The irony cuts deeper than any blade. Humanity's savior is also its greatest monster. The beacon that guides ships through hell burns on the suffering of innocents. Children torn from families, minds shattered, souls consumed. The Emperor's mercy is not kindness, it is simply ending. Her consciousness fragments like glass in a hurricane. Each shard holds a memory. First kiss, favorite song, the warmth of sunlight on skin she'll never feel again. The golden throne hums with mechanical hunger. 10,000 psykers die today. 10,000 more tomorrow. An endless feast of human potential sacrificed to maintain the Imperium's cruel stability. She dissolves into light, into nothingness, into the Emperor's eternal hunger. The throne room falls silent, except for the whisper of machinery. Another soul joins the psychic chorus that powers humanity's lighthouse. Another voice in the screaming symphony that keeps the darkness at bay. In our world, we build monuments to heroes. We celebrate those who sacrifice for the greater good. We tell stories of noble deaths and meaningful endings. But what happens when the hero becomes the monster? When salvation requires damnation? When the light we follow burns brightest on the fuel of innocent suffering? Every day, we make choices about who matters and who doesn't. Whose pain is acceptable for our comfort? Whose voices we silence for our peace? How many souls would you sacrifice to save humanity? Subscribe if you dare to question the price of survival. Some truths burn brighter than stars. The black ships continue their eternal harvest. Every day, somewhere in the Imperium, a child's eyes begin to glow. A mother feels the temperature drop as her daughter's nightmares bleed into reality. The Scholastica Psyker processes 10,000 souls annually. 10,000 futures extinguished before they truly begin. But here's the horrifying truth they never tell you. The Imperium doesn't just consume psykers, it creates them. Every warp jump spreads psychic contamination. Every Imperial world becomes a breeding ground for the very thing they fear most. The Emperor's light, burning across the galaxy, draws the warp's attention like a beacon in the dark. Humanity feeds on itself. The astropaths who guide the ships, they birth the next generation of psykers through their very existence. The navigators who steer through hell, their bloodlines grow stronger, more unstable, more dangerous with each passing century. We are the architects of our own damnation. In the deepest vaults of Terra, records speak of the Emperor's true plan, not salvation, evolution. 10,000 years of controlled mutation, guided by necessity and fear. Every psyker who dies screaming in the soul-binding chambers brings humanity one step closer to becoming what the Emperor always intended, a species of gods or monsters. The distinction grows thinner each day. Tonight, as you sleep safely in your bed, remember this. Somewhere in the darkness, the black ships are coming. Not for criminals or heretics, for children, for the gifted, for anyone whose mind burns bright enough to catch the warp's attention. The Imperium calls it necessity. The Emperor calls it evolution. History will call it what it truly is. Genocide, systematic, methodical, endless. 10 millennia of harvesting human potential and feeding it to the machine of survival. But perhaps that's what survival demands in a universe that wants us dead. Perhaps the real horror isn't what we do to psykers. Perhaps the real horror is that we have no choice. In our world, we speak of necessary evils, of hard choices, of sacrificing the few for the many. We tell ourselves these stories to sleep at night. But when you close your eyes tonight, ask yourself this. If your child's eyes began to glow tomorrow, would you make the call? Would you summon the black ships yourself? Every choice echoes across eternity. Every click shapes the narrative we tell ourselves about who we really are.